who have come into party participation to save the republic. It is these stalwarts, this old guard, who inhabit positions in the apparatus and then hire this. What is this? Welcome back to the Professor Penn Podcast. David Penn, your host. Glad to be with you. Welcome back. This is Tuesday night, April 1st, 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. In full disclosure, because of scheduling issues, we are recording this. Good morning, Tanner.
Good morning, David.
We're in the studio. We're in the studio on Monday morning, the 31st of March. And the way things are moving, there could be so much news between this morning and Tuesday night that we're going to miss. Well, that's the way things go in a studio. But we just got to get caught up because there's so much that happened last week since I saw you that we got to get this in the can. I had a revelation over the weekend. And before I get to it, I'm going to say up front that there is a contention, a contest of ideas going on in the Republican Party, in every state in this union, in every county in this union, in every precinct in this union, about what it is to be a Republican. And for those of us that have a clear idea and have a mission to spread the philosophy of republicanism as it was given to us by the framers of the Constitution, there is one way to win this contest, and it is called the precinct strategy. The precinct strategy. This means that if you are committed to the American movement, the anti-globalist movement, if you are part of the group of people that are seeking to overturn the post-World War II Democrat liberal order, the way to see that this happens is to spread republicanism in your precinct by finding and then recruiting and then bringing new neighbors, citizens, family members, co-workers in Minnesota to the next caucus, which is going to be probably in February of 2026. This is the way politics proceeds here in the United States of America. It's not a bunch of chest beating. It's nice to post. It's nice to do the podcast. But the hard work of politics happens peer to peer in your neighborhood, in your local political party process. So I urge all of you to go to precinctstrategy.com for a tutorial about how to get off the bench and get in the game of politics. I will remind all of us that we have a Friday night precinct strategy X Spaces meeting, which you can find every Friday night at Dan Schultz, the number 2, at Dan Schultz 2. Dan Schultz being the progenitor of the precinct strategy. Actually, he just gave us all the civics lesson that used to be taught in 7th grade up until about, I don't know, maybe like 1973. Here in Minnesota, this fight is, I want to stay away from the word fight. This contest. Well, the left is going to get violent and is getting violent. We see this with the burning of the Teslas and the people getting run over. This is just a prelude to chaos. So I'm going to try to stay in the Republican Party away from words that denote warfare as much as I can. But I have to also say I have been the target of character assassination, of lies, of misinformation and disinformation, characterizing me as as Alex Plekish called me, a mutineer. Alex Plekish, that'd be the chair of our main GOP, called me a mutineer right to my face. Hey, there's witnesses, Alex, so please let's not deny it. And why was I a mutineer? Because I'm not a Mike Pence Republican. I am not a Nikki Haley Republican. I am a Donald Trump Republican. And here in Minnesota, that is the contest between an old guard of Republican stalwarts who control the apparatus of the party and who are wearing MAGA hats and carrying Trump signs, and they're waving Israeli flags, like Mary Amlaw waving that Israeli flag, but they really are not down with the Trump agenda. That's why on today's thumbnail, I got a picture of Tom Emmer dressed up like Pinocchio. And it's not that I'm anti-Emmer, I'm just anti-lying. I want my elected officials who are Republicans to remember that the philosophy of republicanism is the title of tonight's podcast, anti-corruption. That is the cornerstone of republicanism, anti-corruption. And why is that? Because republicanism is a philosophy that emerged to overturn the hereditary rule of kings and queens in association with the church. And the idea was this: absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it corrupts both the ruler and the ruled because it is a unnatural formation of political economy. The idea of the Republican was that a creator granted unalienable rights to every citizen, those being the right to life, to liberty, and to the pursuit of happiness. And that the citizen to pursue those unalienable rights would be best suited with an honest and truthful perspective in life's daily affairs. Therefore, we have the myth of George Washington, who could not tell a lie. Our Republican Party was started by honest Abe Lincoln. See, this is wound into the concept of republicanism. But over time, as happens in human affairs, things run downhill. Strong men bring prosperous and peaceful times, which breed weak men who then have self interest at the expense of community, aggrandizing resources to themselves alone and giving up their, shall we say, social responsibility to love their neighbor as they wish to be loved. They do this through all kinds of manipulations and lies, and things run downhill. And then that creates a moment in time, like we are living in today, where warriors emerge to pursue truth, the search for truth, and the restoration of republicanism. I had a very interesting interaction over the weekend with a Republican Party officer. Her name is Casey, and she called me out for, I think, I don't remember what her word was, but basically for trashing Republicans, those being Paul Gazelka and Pat Garofalo, who took a run at Royce White unnecessarily. And it was Gazelka who, said that Royce White went to a strip club, and then Garofalo, one of the two went first, can't remember. And I remember I went to a meeting, a Zoom meeting, back when Gazelka was the state Senate majority leader. And I was at this meeting, and he was quite late. I was waiting for him. And I thought to myself while I was waiting, what kind of a jerk makes volunteer uh, Republicans who are giving their all for republicanism wait at this length? I thought, boy, this must be really important for us to be sitting here waiting because, I got a life, I got a business, I got a family. So when I'm waiting around for somebody that thinks they're important, it kind of pisses me off because when you think you're important, that's kind of arrogant, right? And he came to the meeting, and the first words out of his mouth was, and he's not stupid, he did this to slap people like me in the face. He goes, geez, I'm so sorry. No, he didn't apologize. Excuse me. Check that. He said, I'm late because I was golfing with the Chamber of Commerce, which is, for those of us in the know, an unabashedly globalist organization. So when Gazelka trashed Royce White relative to the allegation that Royce spent campaign funds on a strip club, which Royce acknowledged subsequently that a wrong credit card was used and he reimbursed the campaign for that charge. Guess what? He really didn't even have to reimburse the campaign because what I said to Gazelka was on X, uh, a golf course and a golf club is to old white men what a strip club is to young black men. And I said, I don't know if you're capable of getting this because, hey, there's kind of an incipient racism here in Minnesota. And guess what he did? He started it and then he blocked me. And then Pat Garofalo blocked me. In my statement to you two people, and I hope you listen to this, what a weak move that is to start a fight and then run away like a rabbit when people stand up and critique your scurrilous accusations. Well, speaking of accusations, there's been an accusation banging around the Republican Party of Minnesota for several years that a critic of mine, a paid media consultant who was formerly the deputy chair of the Republican Party of Minnesota, Michael Broadcorp, was secretly paid by MnGOP to trash Royce White in the last election cycle. In other words, Royce won the endorsement of the party on the first ballot overwhelmingly, uh, quite an event. And then Broadcorp and a guy named Dustin Gragey showed up casting shade on Royce almost from the minute he walked off the podium. And I'm thinking to myself, man, these guys are Republicans. What are they doing? This is the endorsed candidate. Where's the unity that Kendall Qualls is always preaching about? Where's that unity? So this goes back to my comment about this interesting interaction with this Casey character who came after me for commenting on Gazelka and Garofalo. And I tried to engage with her, and, it's not very successful. And then I woke up this morning and I thought to myself, she is using shame and guilt to control my behavior, saying, oh, so you have a purity test for Republicans. You're the reason why Republicans won't win. You're this, you're that. I thought to myself, you Saul Alinsky spouting officer. That's me being nice. Everything that she said is a reversal of the truth. And let me just share my I statements. I entered the party to serve Republicans here in Minnesota. I did it naively and with 100% good intent. I happened to land on a board where Alex Plekish was a board member. And I didn't try. I actually respected Alex at the time. He was an RNC National Committee man. He's a former Marine aviator. I respect Alex and Randy Sutter, who was the chair of our local party. Uh, and I really wanted to serve the party, and I started something called the master classes. And I always say, as a disclaimer, has nothing to do with Masonism. It's a reference in my mind to music because musicians go to what's called master classes held by master musicians to teach younger people what they need to know to become masters. And I thought, I'm going to hold these master classes because there's so many people in my district in CD3 that are seeing all these changes. And, I've been all over the world and I've, had a lot of unique experiences. And one could say, who's gonna jump up and bring forth the changes that are going on in the world and in the party. And I did it in a spirit of really goodwill and service. In fact, I went to the CD3 Executive Committee and asked for Randy Sutter's blessing. And he gave it to me. And thank you, Randy. And we started down the road and we had a master class, another master class, another master class. And then people started pushing back because it started getting popular. A buzz started. A buzz started. And we were getting a lot of people coming to these master classes. Randy had ignored it. But then when he saw a lot of people were going, he showed up and he sought to take over the apparatus of the master class, which in fact he did. And I said, Randy, why are you, what's going on here? And he said, why are you doing this, David? And I said, to bring more people into the Republican tent. And he said, we don't need more Republicans. We need more work from the Republicans we already have. And I didn't understand because I was so naive, so new. I didn't understand that the apparatus was trying to maintain control. Never occurred to me because, I'm not a control freak, Casey. So I call Randy, Mr. We don't need any more Republicans. And Alex, who I was trying to talk to, and to the people on my board, I was trying to talk to them about the changes that were going on in the country and in the world. And Alex said, we don't do that here. And that's why I call Alex Mr. We don't do that here. So this is my experience. I came in to serve the party, and I was repressed. I was lied about. I experienced a lot of anti-Semitism, which was a new experience for me because I really had not run into that in Minnesota. And Casey's implication was that Republicans would lose because I have some kind of purity test. That is a Saul Alinsky reversal of reality. The reality is the citizens that are coming into the party are coming in to save the republic. We believe in the country, we believe in the Constitution, and we want to believe in the Republican Party. And what we found out was we were being repressed. Most of us, including me, we didn't even understand why because we were naive. We thought the party was a vehicle for citizens to participate. We didn't recognize it was a private club run by insiders in every state and at the RNC to control political outcomes. We didn't know that. Well, guess what? Now we do. And this Saul Alinsky blaming it on us, blaming it on me, that's just not going to work. We don't have a purity test. I've said on this podcast a dozen times at least, as an officer of the party, it's not my job to vet who comes into the Republican Party. It's my job to bring in as many people that want to participate as I can. But see, we have things like nominations committees, and there's all kinds of methodologies that the apparatus uses to keep out new people or people that they judge are not worthy of participating in their secret society. And it gets very, very bad, actually, because Royce White popped up on the scene. And, I actually sought Royce out because I thought he'd be a fantastic voice for change here in Minnesota and got involved with his political career. And he won that endorsement. And he met this resistance from this Broadcorp character. And then these allegations started to come up. That Broadcorp was on the payroll of the Minnesota Republican Party. And at the last state central committee meeting, which was, I think, in December of this past year, 2024, a motion was made to reveal, ask the chair at that time, David Hand, to reveal the truth about this hidden disbursement to some company in Wyoming that people were alleging was Broadcorp. And Hand, even though there was a motion passed demanding him to tell the truth about it, he just stood up and said, "Nah, I'm not telling you." Of course, that's why we ended up with Alex Plekish. Well, turns out Broadcorp, uh, according to Alex Plekish, was on the payroll. Alex issued a press release this past week, and I'll read it to you. In light of recent threats by an unaffiliated and rogue group, there's some labeling. That's a distortion. Action for Liberty to release internal information without context or regard for the facts. I want to take a moment to proactively share details that have already been under review and were requested by our state central committee. Well, first of all, um, apparently there was no intent to release this information, but because Action for Liberty was brutal about getting to the truth, Alex felt pressured to release the information. That's what that paragraph says to me. You might read it a different way. Um, the State Central Committee did ask for the information, and they were pissed on by the leadership. I'll continue. One matter that has generated particular interest relates to a contract with a 1972-10 company LLC. There have been questions from both the media and Republicans across the state about who the prior administration contracted with to do work on behalf of the Minnesota Republican Party. Based on multiple endorsed checks and a recently obtained copy of the contract, And you have to ask yourself, what does that mean, a recently obtained copy? That that bears a little bit of scrutiny, doesn't it? Because usually, contracts are filed, easy to get to. We can confirm that said Michael Broadcorp executed the contract and signed the checks. They meant endorsed the checks. While our review is ongoing, it appears, what does that mean? He was paid for services including podcast creation, communication strategy, and public relations work. In other words, the party apparatus, even though 70% of the delegates endorsed Royce White on the first ballot, and if I'm off by a percent or two, please, Michael, don't pick at me, okay? Because I don't remember. But it was a first ballot victory that I do remember. Apparently, the party hired you to trash Royce, and because I was working on the campaign, you trashed me too, taking 10-second snippets of my podcasts and highlighting them as if that explains who I am. Let's listen to Michael Broadcorp and understand what my party is doing. Tanner, could you please cue up number one?
Good evening. I voted in Minnesota today, and I couldn't be more excited. I proudly cast my vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. As a proud Republican, this vote was my time for choosing. Like Reagan said, this isn't about left or right, it's about doing what's right. And I believe Harris and Walz are the leaders we need for a stronger future. They bring hope, unity, and character back to politics. Harris stands for democracy and working across the aisle, while Walz knows how to get things done without dividing us. It's not about party lines anymore. It's about doing what's right for America. I'm choosing character, stability, and a future where we move forward together. To my fellow Republicans, you don't have to settle for chaos. This is your time to choose too. Join me. Let's make history.
Well, that is your Republican Party. So I'm going to ask if you're watching me tonight, repost this podcast. Let everyone in the Republican Party of Minnesota know what this leadership did, who Michael Broadcorp is, and who are all the people like Casey and Kelly Fenton, et cetera, and so on, who support this kind of quote unquote Republicanism. This is not Republicanism. This is the post World War II Democrat liberal order. There's 192 podcasts about how we got into this situation that you can go review at your leisure. The point of the Professor Penn podcast up to this point has been to lay out a case of how do we get where we're at, because it's my belief that if we don't know how we got here, how are we going to get out of this mess? Well, that will not be the point of the ongoing podcasts, because this right here lets every Republican know why there is a gap in the party. It is not the American citizens who have come into party participation to save the republic. It is these stalwarts, this old guard of neocon war hawk, now obviously Democrats, who inhabit positions in the apparatus and then hire this. What is this? What is this? Well, I'm going to leave it for you to spread the word. You be the Paul Revere's and let your fellow Republicans know that the enemy is in the wire. And to the current leadership, Alex Plekish, who was the national committee man at the time this went down, Donna Bergstrom, all of you, who knew about this? When did you know about it? Who is really involved in this decision? This whole, oh, it's a secret thing is not true. This kind of thing does not happen in a vacuum. Blaming it on David Hand like he's some kind of power animal to sacrifice is not going to satisfy me or any of the people that have, guess what, a brain. Things do not happen like this in an organization. Many people knew about this. Many people participated in it, and I want to know who they were because they need to be turfed out of the party immediately. It is not the American citizens that back Royce White, the 1.3 million Minnesotans that voted for him. It's not us that are causing the problem. You Saul Alinsky spouting MFers. I don't want to be impugned like this anymore. Look at the evidence. I've been voting Republican for decades. I worked for this party. I've tried to serve my fellow Republicans. I'll get along with anybody. I want to unify. It's not me that doesn't want to unify. You folks don't want to unify. Quit blaming me for what you intend. And there's more evidence of it. It's not just this awful event. Just since I saw you last, Alex Plekish issued a statement of support for Michelle Fishback, uh, extolling her virtues as the top vote getter in Minnesota, ignoring the process of sovereign citizens to participate in an endorsement process. What is that? You mean we know the outcome before we have the process? That'd be called communism. Minnesota GOP passed a resolution condemning Action for Liberty, as we covered last week. Just in this press release, they were named as an unaffiliated. Well, that's true. They're not affiliated, but they're not a rogue group. They're just a group. Why label them? Why mislead, mischaracterize, and impugn a group of Minnesota citizens that are working for the advancement of conservative ideals and Republican causes here in Minnesota? Just because you don't agree with them, just don't agree with them. Say, I don't agree. Good enough. You don't have to be labeling people. You must be very threatened, Alex. And then up in Otter Tail County, man, these people in Otter Tail, wow. I'm going to have some of them come down if they'll come down. I'm going to invite Merlin Carol Hexum down to talk about this. They were disenfranchised as delegates in 2022. I think, again, this has been an ongoing battle in the party, and the CD7 parliamentarian ruled that they could have an odd year convention to elect new delegates, which quite promptly the party up there, led by the former chair, Craig Bishop, and if I'm getting this wrong, it's because I'm down here in Minnesota and I'm getting it secondhand. But what I heard was they were again deplatformed as delegates, even though the parliamentarian had said it was legitimate. And then he was allegedly let go. They got a new parliamentarian, which underlined the party's effort to get rid of these people yet again. And then they had their CD7 convention up there, and the delegate body refused to accept the delegate report by 2 votes, I heard. And there was a compromise, which many people did not want to see a compromise. And a large proportion of those delegates that were just recently elected were actually seated, which led to the toppling of the establishment chair, Craig Bishop, and the election of a new chair, Brett Bussman. And I congratulate you, Brett, and wish you Godspeed and good luck. And there's a change. And this is the first time. I mean, if you're watching me on War Room or any of these national platforms, I know I get watched. This is a change now. This is starting to work here in Minnesota, where this hold of this anti-Trump group, and they are anti-Trump. And you know what? Wearing a MAGA hat does not make you pro-Trump. It just makes you look good in red. Okay? We know who you are. We know what you're doing. And I'm talking about the real people that support the movement. And I'm not against Michelle Fishbach if she gets elected or she gets endorsed. I'm not against Tom Emmer. I'm not against any Republican. The Constitution of my uh, congressional district in my state commands that if I'm an officer of the party, I support the endorsed candidates. But can we please have an endorsement process? And then when we have one, Could we not hire people to trash the endorsed candidates? And we got this Dustin Gragey, who, is probably, I don't know if he is or he isn't, but he's, seems like he wants a gig working for the Republican Party. And he's out there trashing Royce once again, trashing me, I'm sure. And you're accusing us, Casey, of trashing Republicans? Hey, we didn't start it. We didn't start it. But I'm going to tell you, you've run into a new group now, as they say on the internet, FAFO. We got spine here now in this movement because courage is contagious. You guys could unify now. It's up to you to unify. That's correct. It's not up to us. We're unified with guess who? The President of the United States. If we can't unify around the President of the United States, then what do we got going here? We got what do they call it? An irreconcilable difference. Time for a divorce. People like Kathy Folk, who defeated me in SD 45 when I stood up and said, I'm for President Trump, Kathy Folk is not, and I was defeated. Great. What does that tell me about SD 45? The home district of Alex Plekish. It tells me that people don't support President Trump. Because if there was President Trump supporters in the room, the 14 people who did vote for me, they actually support President Trump. It wasn't like, oh, you like Kathy or you like David. That's not what it's about. It's not about personal. It's not about style. It's about political philosophy. And let me just tell you, for those of you that wonder about why and what, I am in the tire business, which reminds me, you can go to tireget.com to get your spring tires. Please do. But that's not my point right now. My point is to say I sell a lot of American made tires, but everybody that's in the tire business has to import because only 25% of the tires that are consumed in this country, that are consumer tires, are made here. Only 50% of the large truck tires that bring the food to the market are made here. If you don't import, you're not in business. Everyone has to, because all of our jobs in manufacturing, not all, but when you're down to 25%, it's almost all, isn't it? It's been offshored over the course of my career. Donald Trump could put me out of business by what he does with reciprocal tariffs. I could go broke. If I do, okay, it's worth losing everything I have to see my freedom and the freedom of my children maintained, to see the republic maintained, to extract our country from an endless war that could end up killing everybody, which we're going to talk about just in a second. And I'm going to say there are people in the Republican Party who people will say this, thus, that, thus, and this, that, thus, and so about. Almost no one can you bring up that's holding an office that somebody won't criticize. And that's not bad. But I want to shout out to a House member in 29B in the Buffalo and Monticello, Minnesota area, a brave woman named Marion O'Neill Rarick. She has been all over the top of this fraud issue. And I have been saying on the Professor Penn podcast long before Doge that the universities are the head of the snake and that that's what we got to work on. I said a year ago, this is so easy to fix. The universities are addicted to government money. If we get control of the government, all we have to do is cut off the cash and they'll all start wearing Trump hats because these people are really not quite as ideological as they would like us to think. If you're making $200,000 a year to work 6 hours a week with the summers off, tenured with health care and a retirement package, hey, come on. What a great job. The reason they're leftist or rightist or whatever, it's about the cash. These people are not sacred honor people. They're materialists. They're Marxists. So Marion O'Neill, God bless you, Marion. You went after some of these 501c3 uh, organizations that are paying the executives a king's ransom to run charitable organizations. And I've been saying, and I said to you, and I responded to you, would you please go after the head of the Snake University? And just this last week, Marion, and thank you so much for sharing with Minnesota citizens that 1,000, did you say 1,000 people on the payroll of the University of Minnesota? 1,000 people on the payroll of the University of Minnesota make more than the governor of the state. Doesn't that tell us what we need to work on? And this is not a secret. Let me play you something that was recorded during the Carter administration. If you don't know who Ayn Rand is, I urge you to look her up. She wrote two very famous books, which are revered in libertarian and Republican circles, like Atlas Shrugged. She was a political philosopher. She was born under the communist rule in Russia. She emigrated here to the United States. She promoted a kind of philosophy called objectivism. And let's listen to what Ayn Rand had to say about the universities many, many, many years ago.
Most dangerous thing in this country today are the universities, because they're teaching the kind of ideas that would necessarily have to lead to the destruction of this country. Institutions from Harvard on down are preaching collectivism, mysticism, and above all, altruism, self-sacrifice of yourself, the giving up, the resignation.
Can you be a little bit more specific? I've never
Sure.
been to Harvard. I've never been to class there, but can you give me an
That's
example?
your advantage.
Oh, thank you. Of how they are teaching sacrifice, how they are teaching altruism.
Open daily paper and look at Mr. Carter, a very peculiar creature, who is telling you that we're going to overcome the oil shortage by driving less, by giving up. Let us all make a sacrifice. Let's lower our standard of living, and we'll all be living better. Now, is that a proper philosophy to tell a country that has pride and self-esteem, a Harvard that would be preaching American ideas, more specifically reason, individualism, capitalism? If they were doing that, you could have the biggest renaissance in the world, still not too late even now. You could have a better renaissance than the first one. This country would come back to life.
We could still have a renaissance in this country that would be better than the last one when we change our educational system, which Donald Trump is doing. It just takes courage. And Marion, your courage is, in fact, contagious. You're standing up here in this, this kind state, Minnesota nice, and you, in your own inimitable style, you are confronting the worst people with the worst political ideologies bent on destroying the minds and hearts of my children. So I thank you. And for all those people that think I'm not interested in unity, listen closely because I mean it sincerely. Marion O'Neill is a rock star. And for those of you that are so worried that we're not going to win, let me tell you what's going on here. American citizens are waking up to the evil of the uni party, which the apparatus is part of. They're not just waking up on the Republican side, they're waking up on the Democrat side. Both of these parties are getting ready to fracture in two because of the hold of the Chuck Schumers and the Hakeem Jeffries working with the Tom Emmers. And shall we say, who should we pick out for a senator a la a Chuck Schumer? God, there's so many of them. Jim Langford in Oklahoma, he pops to mind, Mr. James Langford. How about Tom Cotton? There's another one. How about Roger Wicker in Mississippi? We could go on and on. Mitch McConnell, there's a honey bear. Aha. So this political realignment, which is going on worldwide, let us not fear it. Let's embrace it. Let's listen to Donna Brazile of the Bill Clinton era talking about this in a recent interview. Number 3, please.
Be careful what you wish for, because there will be a lot of Democrats that will face a primary challenge from our revolution come next year.
Well, that's an interesting prediction.
I mean, look, like I think Dawn is absolutely right. This is the beginning of the starting gun to a bunch of primaries that are going to happen. We were talking about it in the green room. But the problem for Democrats right now is if they're primaried by a bunch of Bernie Sanders, AOC-type Democrats, they're going to have a real hard problem flipping the House. I mean, look, they only have to win a couple of seats. And while these folks really sort of gin up the base, they get people really excited, Democrats really excited. When it comes to independent voters, a lot of those types think Democrats are out of touch. They don't like what they see as sort of Democrats moving further left. So, like, that's not necessarily a win. And the other thing about your interview, I have to say, John, I mean, look, it's one thing to sort of energize the base. It's another thing to go directly after your party leadership. And obviously he dodged that question, tried to
We
get
stop this, please. Casey, I hope you're watching. She sounds like you and she looks like you. So you see in the center, in the status quo, in the bipartisan, it's the same, but just a little different. We're going to move on, Canary. You can take Casey off the screen there. And the reason why I'm striding about this, why I'm not trying to be liked, because I'm really not a politician. We're in World War III, and the outcome of this war and what happens to my children is predicated on American domestic and foreign policy. So, it's not business as usual around the campfire now, because there's a group of people in the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, and political parties all over the world that have a gun to your head. While President Trump is doing everything he can to bring about a peaceful resolution in the Ukraine, there are people working against him with all of their might and all of their skill. And people say, well, Israel, 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 Israel. Hey, the world's not going to come to an end over Israel and Iran. Iran might come to an end, but that's not the end of the world. The end of the world is going to come because of the Ukraine, because of a British intellectual tradition that goes back to a man named John Mackinder, that the Crown funded over 100 years ago to develop a political philosophy called the World Island Theory, the world island being Eurasia. And Mackinder stated that whoever controls Eurasia controls the world, and the control of Eurasia was predicated on controlling the heartland of Eurasia, which is, guess what? The Ukraine. So the British, who have been coveting the $100 trillion of untapped resources in Russia since, the colonial period. Oh, maybe we're still in the colonial period. We just don't get it. They created a theory, kind of like the origin of the species, to justify their greedy and naked ambition for power. Now, President Trump is trying to bring a ceasefire forth. There was a ceasefire announced as regards energy infrastructure, failed. Our press blamed the Russians. Other press blamed the Ukrainians. As I said in the last podcast, not that important to me. They're still killing the hell out of each other. Now a effort is being made to broker a ceasefire at sea so that grain and other agricultural products can get out of the region and to the world. It's just an idea. It's not working yet. In fact, the Europeans are working full speed to keep this war moving. There was a meeting last week of the 27 members of the EU. A vote was proposed to support the Ukraine and move funding and military support forward. And guess what? Viktor Orban of Hungary, that one leader voted against the resolution, meaning it was not so resolved. And of course, Viktor Orban is labeled as an authoritarian and as a cretin, just like Donald Trump is, labeled so by the same people. Here's his quote. Over the past 3 years, Hungarian families have lost around 2.5 million forints, which is 6,000 euros per household as a result of the war. I must stop this, and we must not allow Hungarian families to continue to pay the economic consequences. He urged European capitals to get in Trump's corner. He continues, there is one way to achieve peace. If we get Europe to support the President of the United States in his peace efforts instead of embarking on war adventures, only then will there be peace. So here's the authoritarian asking for peace. You know, asking for peace does not sound very authoritarian. It sounds peaceful. Well, let's take a look at number 5 and figure out what our European allies have in mind.
So Europe is getting ready for war and it wants its citizens to prepare too. Brussels has issued guidelines for all 450 million Europeans. 450 million people across all 27 member states. Every household has been asked to maintain a survival kit to stock up on things like bottled water, canned food, a torch, and basic supplies like toilet paper. This stock should last for at least 3 days. That is the instruction. It is part of a new European strategy for preparedness.
Today's threats facing Europe are more complex than ever, and they are all interconnected. The battlefields in our pockets, our phones, our computers, our power plants, our banks, our supply chains, our raw materials, and in the media, the social media we consumed every day. These are all battlefields, and they are being weaponized to threaten our European way of life and our democracies.
Brussels wants Europeans to be ready for anything. A war, cyber attacks, extreme weather events like floods or wildfires, even a major disease outbreak. Europeans must be self-sufficient, at least for the first 72 hours of any crisis. That is the key message of Europe's preparedness plan. Top EU leaders are urging people to act on it. They're suggesting keeping an emergency bag ready at home.
It's Ajalabi. Welcome to What's in My Bag Survival Edition. My document in a waterproof pouch, a must in a rainy Brussels. Let's talk about lighting. I have a flashlight and, of course, the light. Turn. And my special friend, a Swiss Army knife, and of course some cash. In the middle of a crisis, cash is king. A charger and a power bank, because a dead phone is a dead end. This is everything you need to survive the first 72 hours of a crisis. Speaking about being prepared, the EU is preparing its strategy to be sure that every citizen is safe in case of crisis. Be prepared, be safe.
That's good. Thank you, Tanner.
Can I say something real quick?
Sure.
You know, I don't like the energy behind it, but I will say this is actually kind of cool that the government's coming out and saying, hey, guys, we should prepare a bag for survival. I think that alone is pretty cool.
Yeah, except there's one problem.
What's the problem?
In a nuclear war, that bag and everything in it is going to be incinerated.
Yeah, that's
These
true.
people are not playing with conventional weapons.
Yeah.
They're playing with nuclear war. So this is some kind of a psychological process and not an actual survival process. Now, here in the United States, I do agree that all of us need to have a survival strategy. And because we have a president that is trying to get us out of this quagmire, we might survive. And let me just let you know how evil and how unpredictable and how sneaky these people are. Let's talk about one of our most revered leaders, Winston Churchill, and what he did to bring the United States into World War II.
Churchill finally hit on the idea in the middle of 1940 of buying from the United States 50 World War I destroyers, which were completely useless, exchanging them, in fact, for valuable pieces of British Empire real estate. He gave to the United States bits of the Caribbean islands that were our colonies. He gave bits of Newfoundland and bits of British Guiana in return for 50 destroyers that were so useless, in fact, that not one saw action in World War II, except, I think, for the Campbelltown, which was only fit to be towed across the English Channel, laden with dynamite and blown up in the French dock gates in Saint-Nazaire in March 1942. It wasn't a very good bargain, in other words. Not some of the world's Adolf Burley, the American Undersecretary of State, wrote in his diary, with one single gulp we have managed to obtain a large part of the British Empire in return for nothing, namely these 50 destroyers. This was one of the methods that Churchill was using in an attempt to drag the United States closer and closer to the brink of war. Another method that he used was far more cynical. As he said to Ambassador Kennedy in June or July 1942, Churchill said to Kennedy, "You watch. When Adolf Hitler begins bombing London and bombing towns in Britain like Boston and Lincoln, towns with their counterparts in the United States, you Americans will have to come in, won't you? You can't just stand aside and watch us suffering." But he knew from code breaking, he knew from reading the German Air Force signals, which we had broken on May 26, 1940, that Hitler had given orders that no British town was to be bombed. London was completely embargoed. The German Air Force was allowed to bomb ports and harbors and dockyards, but not towns as such. And Churchill was greatly aggrieved by this, and he wondered how much longer Hitler could avoid carrying on war like this. But Hitler, as we know, carried on until September 1940 without bombing any English towns. The embargo stayed in force. You can see it in the German archives now, and we know from the code breaking of the German signals that Churchill was reading Hitler's orders to the German Air Force not on any account to bomb these towns. So there was no way that we could drag in the Americans that way unless we could provoke Hitler to do it. Which is why on August the 25th, 1940, Churchill gave the order to the British Air Force to go and bomb Berlin. Although the Chief of the Bomber Command and the Chief of Staff of the British Air Force warned him that if we bomb Berlin, Hitler may very well lift the embargo on bombing British towns. And Churchill just twinkled, because it was what he wanted, of course. At 9:15 that morning, he telephoned personally Bomber Command himself to order the bombing of Berlin, 100 bombers to go and bomb Berlin. And they went out and bombed Berlin that night, and Hitler still didn't move. Hitler ordered another raid on Berlin, and so it went on for the next 7 or 10 days until finally on September the 4th, Hitler lost his patience and made that famous speech in the Sport Palace in Berlin in which he said, "This madman has bombed Berlin now 7 times. If he bombs Berlin once more, then I shall not only just attack their towns, I shall wipe them out. Ich werde ihre Städte ausradieren." A very famous speech. Of course, German school children are now told about the Hitler speech. They're not told about what went first. They're not told how Churchill sent out deliberately to provoke the bombing of his own capital. And on the following day, Churchill ordered Berlin bombed again.
This is called a false flag, or creating the conditions where war must happen. We revere Churchill historically because history is written by the winners. And, I didn't vet this source, and if it turns out the guy is a Holocaust denier or whatever, I didn't check out who this guy was. I know about this event, and I look for something to share it with you. There's many events that have happened through history, like the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which led to the Vietnam War, which precipitate major conflict. And remember the Maine, that's another one, where there are sometimes allegations, sometimes proven fact, where governments will create crises to gain the support of a populace which heretofore had been anti-war, as we are here in the United States today. But there is no doubt in my mind, and there can be no doubt in your mind, after seeing that EU short telling its citizens to prepare for an emergency, that there is an effort in the European Union to continue this war. And in fact, at a policy level, they're preparing to continuing it even without the support politically, in terms of material, in terms of money, even without the support of the United States of America, because Donald Trump is in fact withdrawing from the post-war Democrat liberal order. And that's why we're having these contentious arguments in the Republican Party. And this is why I have the picture on the thumbnail of Tom Emmer dressed as Pinocchio, because Tom Emmer at the CD6 convention, for example, was confronted by Royce White this past Saturday, and Royce said, "Hey, why didn't you support me?" And Tom said, "You didn't contact me." Well, I know that's not true because I was part of the campaign, and every effort was made to contact you, Representative Emmer. I'm a witness to it. I don't know why you didn't support Royce. The fact is you did not, which again is part of why we have a breakdown of party process. But you weren't alone. Rudy Boschwitz came out against Royce. Norm Coleman came out against Royce. Kendall Qualls, Michelle Benson, Paul Gazelka, Pat Garofalo, Michael Broadcorp. We did not start this. 1.3 million Minnesotans, and if I got that number slightly wrong, I'm sorry, supported Royce. He got the greatest support of any candidate against Amy Klobuchar. It's not right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just a fact. And if you look at the map of Minnesota, which we've played on the podcast, it has gotten progressively more red each year. Donald Trump has been involved in the American political process going back to 2016. It's getting red, not because of the efforts of MnGOP, not because of the efforts of Kendall Qualls, not because of the efforts of David Hann or Alex Plekish or Kathy Folk or any of the rest of these stalwarts. It's getting more red because of the Trump movement. And what is that Trump movement? It's an America First movement, is getting out of these international entanglements that George Washington, the first Republican, urged us to be aware of. And Donald Trump is doing it across the board. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But make no mistake, make no mistake. We're in the deepest, most dangerous part of the forest. It is natural to believe that President Trump's victory heralds in a new era of peace and prosperity. Right now, it is heralded in a new era of conflict. And I don't mean, and I am not comparing in any way, shape, or form Jesus Christ to Donald Trump. It just came to mind the 501c3 depiction of Christ versus what you can go read in Matthew 10:34. I did not come to bring peace, but came with a sword. And the enemies you will face will be those in your own household. I will turn son against father and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law, and so on and so forth. To bring about change requires a contention, a contest of ideas. Let's not be afraid of it. Let's do it with some eloquence. And as Royce reported to me, he said to Tom Emmer, people change. I voted for George W. Bush. I would never do that now. I wouldn't vote for Al Gore either. I mean, I have to sit on my hands. I would work against globalism because I see that the globalist political philosophy has reached the point of diminishing returns and exposing my children to war and poverty. It's just very obvious to me. So I hope it becomes obvious to you. And if you're watching me, Casey, and it's not obvious yet, we can certainly get together because there is ample evidence that any of us can find about the dangerous moment that we are in geopolitically and domestically. Collaborating with communists because we have no courage is not the answer. Doing these things for self-aggrandizement as politicians is not the answer. Standing up to evil, as Marion O'Neill has demonstrated, is the path forward. Even though our intelligence agencies are reaffirming that there's no evidence that Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons, and even though Iran says it's open to indirect talks with the United States, the United States is transferring its military assets into the region of the Middle East, because President Trump is not playing around now, and he's put the Iranians on a 2-month notice that they have to negotiate to end their nuclear program. 25% of our entire B-2 inventory has now been transferred to Diego Garcia, which is an island from which sorties can be flown to attack Iran's nuclear program. And I think part of it for President Trump is what's going on in the Red Sea, where the Yemenis, the Houthis, are continuing their interruption of international shipping. Let's look at number 7, please. These are films of shipping attacks in the Red Sea. And here are rocket launches in the region. The United States has been flying daily sorties, bombing and attacking Houthi facilities in Yemen. The Houthis have been at war for years. They're used to this kind of thing. This is a warrior tribe, and they are more than happy to die for cause. They have announced that they have attacked and struck the USS Truman, this aircraft carrier that you're seeing. There is no verification of this. In the past hours, the missile forces, the drone air force, and the naval forces carried out military operations targeting hostile warships in the Red Sea, primarily against the American aircraft carrier, the Truman. It serves as a launching base for aggression against our country. Confrontation and engagement lasted for several hours. And as of this time of this statement, armed forces continue to actively confront aggression and responsibly address various developments and emergent situations within the operational area. Also, there has been attacks in Israel launched by the Houthis. Some film here of that. Looks like World War III to me, just because the bombs are not raining down on where you live today does not mean they will not rain down tomorrow. Therefore, it is my belief that we must root out the globalists from within the Republican Party, because they're going to lead us right into a war that will have very uncertain outcomes. Now, I recognize there are people like Alex Plekish who traveled to the Ukraine last year and traveled to Israel that believe in the supremacy of U.S. military might, believe in the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. Alex is not alone. There are many people that follow him. Some of them are not as aware of the policies as he is. Thinking of people like Jim Nash. Not everybody is aware of what, because that's Christ said that, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. Some of the people, perhaps Casey, maybe doesn't understand what's going on here. I do, many American citizens do, and we have to continue to try to educate our fellow Republicans about the dangerous situation within which we find ourselves and pursue the precinct strategy in our neighborhoods. This has got to emerge out of the neighborhoods. This apparatus is deeply entrenched. I'm running for the chair of CD3. I think the convention is April 12th. I'm going to go up, stand in front of the people. Everybody knows who I am. And it'll just be an up or down. I mean, if people want to continue down this road where our party is hiring Michael Broadcorp, endorsing Congress people without an endorsement process, and et cetera, and so on, this kind of stuff. If we want to continue this, we'll elect my opponent, Stan Hamilton. I heard now Anna Matthews is running, who was working with David Hand. I don't have any confirmation on that. But, the entire apparatus, and I say this because I'm so impressed by Marianne O'Neill. It is not a new thing. This fraud and abuse and control and manipulation, this didn't just jump up since Donald Trump got elected and DOJ started its investigations. This has been going on my entire adult life. I've known about it for years. That's why I decided to get into politics. I knew about it. My father knows about it. Heaven knows about it. Everybody who is paying attention knows about it, which means every elected official in the state house, in the federal government, in the art house, wherever these people are domiciled, they knew that this grifting, this stealing and robbing was going on. So if we're going to change this by electing the very people who tolerated it, how is that going to work? And I say to my fellow Republicans in CD3, do we not need a change as CD7 has now started by electing Brett Bussmann? Do we not need to bring in new people with new ideas to unify the party? Because the unification is not going to come from any of the people who have been involved. They've played their card. They hired Michael Broadcorp. And please, again, don't tell me that it's David Hand falling on the sword for the establishment. All that is a scam. Go fool somebody else. You're not going to fool me, Alex. Who knew? When did they know? And how are we going to get rid of them? That's the question I ask. Unless you support Michael Broadcorp. Because if you do, hey, it's all good in the hood, isn't it? This war is right at our southern border. Just to let you know, for those of you who are not in the know, we're in World War III. That's why I speak this way. Hey, if this was 1994, I'd be a little different about it. This is 2025. Time to wake up. Playtime is over. U.S. Northern Command, Northcom, U.S. Northcom, has deployed yet a second Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer to support operations, guess where? Along our southern border with Mexico. Because President Trump has determined that there are terrorist organizations that the Biden administration, in concert with Republican collaborators, allowed into this country to sow seeds of chaos, as we're about to see. And we have intellectuals called jurists sitting on federal benches preventing the administration from removing these people. Are you getting a sense of how far gone this is? Thank you, Marion. The problem is at the law school at the University of Minnesota. That's where the problem is. You're doing the right thing. Keep going. I will support you in the next election cycle. The rest of the things that people may or may not want to criticize you about don't matter. That bravery needs to spread to every member of the caucus. We don't need legislation. We need bravery. The war is right at our border. It's right in our neighborhoods. President Trump, since I saw you last, invoked a Wartime Emergency Powers Act. Huh? You get that? Invokes wartime emergency powers in order to prioritize U.S. mineral and industrial production. Are you getting it? It's called a Wartime Emergency Powers Act. So I went to the CD6 convention. The caucus Republicans had beautiful trays of sandwich meats displayed. There was donuts and coffee, and everybody was having a good time. It was like a social event. Hey, it's not social times. In Turkey, this has gone so far that President Erdogan has jailed his top political rival. I've been in Turkey many times. Turkey is a NATO member, and it is now a dictatorship where the opposition party's head has been arrested on charges that are at best suspicious. But it's not just Turkey. As I came into the studio today, Marine Le Pen, who is the leader of the nationalist movement in France, was convicted and is now barred from future political activity. Are we getting it? How far the apparatus will go to maintain its power? It is not we, the people, who wish to suspend the Constitution. So if you're in the apparatus and you love the country, you love the republic, you love our way of life, it's time to start to rethink and to elect new leadership across the party because in wartime, um, collaboration is not helpful, and neither is cowardice, and neither is lying. Like Julia Coleman, a Nikki Haley supporter, plastering a Donald Trump sticker on her laptop like some kind of symbol of participation. No, Julia, you're not a Donald Trump supporter. You're an anti Donald Trump player, as was Tom Emmer. But again, I voted for George W. Bush. Any of us at any time can wake up and recognize where we've been, what has happened, and where we are headed. Julia, do you support the party hiring Michael Broadcorp? Is that the party you support? Or are you going to call for a full investigation that leads to the turfing out of the current leadership in all the congressional districts? Because such a thing could only happen with the support of the statewide leadership. They knew what was going on, in my opinion. David Hand falling on the spear for everybody, I was there, is a scam. Otherwise, the contract would never have been found. President Trump is removing us from globalist activities. Trump officials are cutting programs that fight child labor abroad. Oh, my goodness gracious. You know what? We got problems with our children here in Minnesota. Let's take that money and spend it in North Minneapolis. I realize there's child labor problems in Guatemala and Chile and Mexico. I get it. But we got kids that can't read and write 15 minutes from where I'm recording this. Let's spend the money there on teachers, real teachers that want to teach. 10,000 federal health workers are going to be laid off. Oh, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. What are they doing? We got the 48th longest life expectancy in the world, yet we spend more money on healthcare than any country in the world. We got a great healthcare system. It just doesn't lead to a longevity. Are we getting this, Republican Party officers? What we're participating in here, the greatest scam in world history? When are we going to wake up? Man, if you elect me, I'm going to say we woke up here in CD3. Whoa, the calls are coming in. Excuse me. Economy news. Germany and France are calling on Europe to hit back on President Trump's tariffs. Well, we're recording this on Monday, the 31st of March. On April 2nd, President Trump has termed that Liberation Day. Last week, he announced the imposition of 25% tariffs on automobiles. Unless, of course, they're built here, there's no tariffs. But wherever they come from in the world, automobiles and automobile parts, they're getting a tax of 25% at the border. Yes, they are. And everybody is going crazy about it. And the Europeans are calling for a riposte, as Macron called it. You can look that up. It's REPOSTE. The prosperity of the world has been gained on the backs of American citizens. Now we're poor. I don't want to stay poor. I want my children to be poor. I don't want Tanner to be poor. Tanner, how old are you?
I'm 25.
25 years old. It's been a while. How does your generation, 25-year-olds, feel about their economic prospects? And I mean, what is there hopefulness in your generation?
No, not much. I mean, people are doing better. So like I think a little bit of the mental has changed because a lot of us were kids that thought that McDonald's should be paying us X amount. and now we're starting to understand where our energy needs to be to have higher paying jobs. But the one thing that I find with my generation is we all have kind of slumped our heads down and went, okay, I guess we'll just never own a house. That is something that my generation is probably the most concerned about, is the fact that we're probably all going to be renters for the rest of our lives.
That'd be called being a serf.
Yeah.
A serf. We're returning the post World War II Democrat liberal order is returning us to kings and queens, now they're PhDs, and serfs. All the gains of our economy are going to 20% of the most educated people. And 80% of the people can't get good jobs. Tanner has a good gig here, and I'm going to ask you, please support Free People Radio, because I'm the kind of a leader that I share my gains with everybody that works with me. That's what it is to be a leader. It's different on being a leader than it is to being a pig. Not a pig. I will share the gains that we make with all the people that work with me. I don't view them as working for me. In fact, I'm not a very good businessman sometimes because I think about my neighbor. I don't just think about myself. And in business, sometimes that doesn't turn out too good for me. So please go to the Free People store, support this content. It's springtime, 25% of you are going to need tires. Please go to tireget.com or call in. We'll make sure you get what you need. We have to make these kind of economic appeals because this is not free. It takes a lot to keep these broadcasts going. Please support Royce. Please call me crazy. The Hebrews. We're starting new properties. We're doing a lot of additional now content that you can repost. One of the things that we can all do in this community, and I do see a real digital community forming up. I want to thank so many of the people that are now following me and communicating with me on X. It's fantastic. I've been waiting for this. Let's build out that digital network, and let's repost, and let's use Free People Radio as a center for unification. I invite Walter Hudson. I went to a X Spaces that he held this past Friday night. It was beautiful, really well done. Walter was very eloquent. It was very respectful. He let me speak. I invite Walter back on the podcast. I invite all Minnesota legislators on. Marion, please come on. Uh, you know, we're not against anybody here. We think that through education, through dialogue, we're all going to coalesce in the same place, which is doing things for the Republic of the United States of America. So although I'm running a little bit roughshod on Tom Emmer today, Tom Emmer is being very supportive of President Trump and everything he tweets. Um, Tom can come on. What were we going to say? What for the 200th podcast? We want
Yeah.
Tom Emmer to come on,
Oh, that
right?
would be awesome. Episode 200, have Tom Emmer in. I
Tom,
think that'd just be awesome.
you're invited on here, and all I want to hear is that you're really down with the Trump agenda so that other Republicans in Minnesota can hear you make that statement. Not in a soundbite, not in 20 seconds, but a full-throated hour-and-a-half endorsement of the things that we're doing beyond President Trump, because President Trump's going to be done at the end of this term. He's going to be 82 years old. It's the ideas of American sovereignty that we must seek to maintain. That is why President Trump is imposing these reciprocal tariffs, because it's a repudiation of the World Trade Organization, which in many respects is more important and more powerful than the United Nations because it governs commercial behavior in this world. And people say, oh, well, it's the rules-based order. It could have been. The Chinese joined it, studied the rules for the express purpose of figuring out how to break the rules. So when you get a major economy like China in this organization and they only break the rules, in that case, it doesn't work anymore. President Trump knows that. That's how these folks are. A lot of investment coming to the United States. The United Arab Emirates has committed $1.4 trillion of investment in the U.S. economy. That's a big deal. There are trillions of dollars now of committed investment that are coming into this country to respond to President Trump's economic nationalism. There will be a lag between there'll be a lag between when these tariffs start and when these investments kick in. And the left and the Republicans, so-called, who really are not, like the Michael Broadcorps, David Frooms, Bill Kristol's, there's a bunch of them. They're going to rip on President Trump because he's changing a decrepit political economy that is counterproductive for freedom. And when you change something that's been entrenched for 75 years, there's going to be some dislocation. There's going to be some disruption. We're going to live through it. And as I said earlier, if it bankrupts my company, so be it. I hope President Trump doesn't bankrupt my company, but if he does, if what I'm doing economically is a casualty of these changes, that's what happens. I want Tanner's generation, and Tanner is basically the age of my kids. I want my kids to have a fair shot at a free life. Or as Ayn Rand said, to pursue their self-interest economically, to pursue their life and their liberty and happiness as they see fit, as was granted to them by a creator, rights that are unalienable. President Trump did something that was super interesting. He has imposed what's called secondary tariffs on any country that's buying oil from Venezuela. In other words, he's not too happy with the Venezuelans because they sent these TRA terrorists up here, number one. Number two, Venezuela is part of that axis which is trying to subvert American sovereignty to undermine our country, and he knows it, and he's just not kidding around about it, unlike Biden, who was happy to let that go on. And you know, there's a hidden agenda. Let's play number 8.
Last year I spoke about the optimists who dare greatly and have made our state what it is today. Those with the big can-do spirit that reflects the best of our Alaskan heritage, who have had to overcome the naysayers and the pessimists, and I described that in detail last year. This historical divide still lingers in our state and continues to drive politics in D.C. On one side, you had people arguing that our state could never succeed on its own, so we would do better continuing as a territory run by an absent federal landlord who would protect us and occasionally give us scraps from the wealth of America's table to keep us happy or at least mollified. On the other side, you had people like Bob Bartlett, Wally Hickel, and Ted Stevens, who saw such great possibility in our people and who saw the key to our future would be to unlock the wealth of Alaska and our private sector economy of our bountiful state with sustainable economic growth and jobs that we create here. This was supposed to have been the promise of statehood. As Bartlett said, because of statehood, Alaska is no longer a beggar on the national table. There are those who still view the federal government as our wealthy but distant and sometimes arrogant protectorate. And of course, this arrogant federal landlord view of Alaska was on full display and reached its zenith under President Biden with his last frontier lockup, an unprecedented 70 executive orders and executive actions exclusively focused on Alaska and shutting down our economy, our private sector economy, and did so much to hurt working families. These anti-Alaska actions from the Obama and Biden administration directly killed, at a minimum, hundreds of good-paying private sector jobs and almost certainly opportunities for thousands more in Alaska. I hope our kids and our grandkids, for their sake, never have to undertake and go through this kind of assault on our federal state of Alaska ever again.
Secondary tariffs, which will encourage the buyers of Venezuelan crude to give it up, will open up opportunities for the United States to export that black gold, further contributing to the retiring of our crushing federal debt. President Trump is working in every direction. I'm sure this effort in Alaska will be opposed by environmentalists who will sue to stop it. President Trump, since I saw you, went after the election integrity issue in every state, demanding identification. Those states that do not follow along with that are going to be denied federal funding. That will be opposed in federal court. The expulsion of terrorists from our shores has already been opposed. The cutting of the government's been opposed. We're now running into the real battle for the future of the country, which is being prosecuted within our court system, and the antagonist is the product of our university system, the leftist Marxist judges, attorneys, lawyers, rule of law, who are going to do everything they can to maintain the post-World War II Democrat liberal order, of which they are the priests thereof. How do I know this so well? Well, my mother is one of them. I remember my mother was a Marxist anti-war protester in the 60s. She was a leader of the women's rights movement in the 60s. My father was also a leader of the anti-war movement and a 50-year faculty member at the University of Minnesota. I grew up with these people. I was in the room when the leaders of the universities left, decided how they were going to take over the university. I remember the names of the people in the room, people like Ken Keller, who became president, Fred Lukerman, who was the dean of CLA, my father, a biologist named Marty Dworkin, my mother. Yes, I was there. They made a plan. It was a 50-year plan, and they succeeded. The law school, my mother looked at me when I was in second grade, and she said, David, I am not going to live my life for you. I'm going to law school to, and really she made it very clear, they had tried to overthrow the country and they ran into Richard Nixon. And when they realized that the establishment of that time was too powerful for them to overcome, my mother said to me very directly, I'm going into the system to overturn it. And she became a lawyer, had Al Gore won in 2000. She would have become a federal judge. She was promised a federal judgeship. She would be sitting on the federal bench today, other than the fact that George Bush ended up being the president, and she decided at that time to go into charity work. And I'm not impugning my mother. She was a ethical, moral person. She did not steal. She did not rob. She lived a life of almost poverty to pursue her political agenda. You're going to say, well, how did I end up the way I was? Her parents and my father's parents came from the old country. And when my mother said, I'm going back to law school, those folks took care of me and they did everything they could to break me away from my mother and father, who they thought were communists. They were believers in the one true God. So I got a religious education and an education in faith that I could not get from my mother. And I don't hate my mother for it. She had I think, a righteous indignation about the military industrial complex of that day, which was, of course, at that time run by a different kind of an establishment. When the leftists went into the system, went into the universities to take them over, that's when the government got involved in the universities. They said, hey, we'll just put all these people on the payroll and they'll be easy to control. And that's what they did, and that's where we are. I'm going to go out with one clip that we've played before. 2 times. I'm going to play it a third time. I want to play this clip because it will give you, my valued viewers, my community, a view into the enormity of the system that President Trump is almost single-handedly trying to, for a kind word, adjust. Please play number 9. This is a digital depiction of what world trade looks like, the enormity of it. These are the vessels that are traversing the 7 seas. Each dot is a cargo ship. And the bright areas at the coast, that's South America, those are the ports where these vessels dock. Look at the enormity of international globalism. This is a system that the United States of America put together. It has just reached a point where it's not working for our fellow citizens. This system can be adjusted. It doesn't need to be ended. It needs an adjustment. Why would there be so much pushback on an adjustment? And that's because in our political class, in our Republican Party, there are people that want to see the American citizens poor and dependent so that we are easy to control. This is the system of the billionaires. This is the system of the oligarchs. This is the system that has been taken over by evil and at one time was a system for good. Let us restore it to a system of good, to a system of peace and well-being for all the people in the United States of America and on this planet. This is David Penn, your host. I want to thank you for joining. I wish you well and look forward to seeing you again Thursday, God willing.
Have a good night, everybody.